Welcome to Fellowship Safaris, conversations about people of color and their journeys to subspecialist training in their countries of origin and around the world.
Today, I promise this is going to be such an exciting episode. I have one of my dearest friends from Mexico, and I'll give her a chance to introduce herself.
Thanks, Jerry, for inviting me to this exciting experience. My name is Tamara Gamboa. I'm a pediatrician, Mexican, mother of 3 children, adolescents, and I completed a master in medical education in the Netherlands and more recently a fellowship in adolescent medicine in Canada. I just want to highlight I'm 46 now.
Woo!
I think that brings context.
Amazing context, Tamara. What are some of the thoughts that came to your mind as we were preparing for our episode today?
I remembered I was worried about the different programs many times. And the time that I invested being worried was worth it. Second thing, many of the results just happened and were not necessarily linked to my worries.
By the way, how long were you a pediatrician before you went into medical education and adolescent medicine?
Medical education was an area of my interest, like very early on my medical career. So when I graduated from pediatrics in 2006, I started working at the hospital where I did my training, and my appointment was half-time clinical work and half-time medical education. I entered the master in 2008, so 2 years after graduation. With adolescent medicine, it was quite different. Once I completed the master, I started practicing pediatrics and doing some work on medical education. And after 14 years of being a pediatrician, I realized I needed to learn more about adolescents, and I started looking for a fellowship.
14 years. That's already another adolescent, lifetime. I think it speaks to your love for knowledge and your love for education and being able to share that with other people. Could you tell us what the process was like looking for a program in medical education?
I'm going to be super honest with you. My ex husband was doing a fellowship in fetal medicine in Barcelona. And for immigration purposes, I needed to have a study visa. So originally, I got registered at the Master of Medical Education in the University of Barcelona. And I was supposed to start on August 2009. But then in December or probably January 2009, I got an email from the university saying, we haven't reached the number of students we need to open this program next summer, so we're not going to be able to offer it. And my ex-husband was already in Barcelona. And of course, as a family, we were super stressed by the idea that I was not going to be able to get a permit to travel to Spain. And my boss just offered, why don't you look for other options? There was the program in the Netherlands, which was a mixture of distance based and in person learning. I got the support from the hospital I was working in. They funded my master. The way I see it now, it's more like it was life taking me somewhere I was not planning to, but that ended being the most beautiful learning experience I've ever had, no doubt.
Oh, wow. I love how you mentioned so many beautiful things. One, that you're able to have an honest conversation, in the hospital you worked at, saying this was my situation, and they helped you troubleshoot. They helped fund your program. That's amazing.
Yep, I'm very lucky, I have to say.
Tell us a little bit more about this beautiful experience that you had in the medical education masters that you pursued?
Well, what happened at that time was that because I was working in this hospital in Mexico in the medical field, we ended up arranging that all the assignments that I had in the master, I was going to work on the hospital population, like in the Mexican hospital population. And this program is particularly hands on. So you are always doing curriculum assessment, curriculum design, but everything is case based. So it was very rich to have the opportunity to learn at the same time of practicing in the institution that was funding me. At the same time, I was working in Spain because my family was living there. So I took some calls, and I don't know how I managed to do the master, do some calls and make some money, and then raise my first son at the same time.
Tamara, how have I never known this? You were doing all those three things at the same time. What was like one or two helpful things that helped you balance being a mom, being in school, and having to do this extra work?
I think it's always been very clear to me that I do and I spend my time doing what I love to do. And it hasn't been hard for me to decide or to break my day into some time for my family and myself, and then some time for learning or working. It's just having this clarity that I love what I do.
That's amazing. How long was this medical education master's program?
It was a 2-year program.
After you completed the medical education program, was there an opportunity to stay on or did you head back to Mexico? What happened from there?
So we never thought about staying in Europe. I knew because the hospital that was funding me, I needed to go back to Mexico. I was super excited to go back to share what I've learned. So we never thought about staying in Europe. At the same time, I was pregnant with my twins. So it was like a family decision to better go back to Mexico and have family support for having the twins born. Unfortunately, I had to stay in Europe because the pregnancy got a little complicated. So the twins were born in Barcelona, and after 5 weeks, we moved back to Mexico.
Are you able to share one or two projects, like just very briefly, that you ended up being part of curriculum design for once you were back in Mexico?
So once I went back to Mexico, I started collaborating with a nonprofit organization, and I was appointed as the head of the learning platform they had. So we designed 5 programs for public health that were provided to healthcare workers all over the country. We had one in vaccinology, one in women's health, another one for diabetes and hypertension, another one for cancer, and another one for genomics. And I was in charge of designing them with the experts, like with the content experts. It was very rewarding to see that what I've learned was something that allowed us to really create wonderful courses that help.
It's just so amazing to hear that as a pediatrician, you are able to be so impactful in educating healthcare workers in your country. I'll just jump forward the 14 years. Tell us about how, you got interested in adolescent medicine and how you settled on the institution.
I was practicing pediatrics, very busy agenda. I've been working for 14 years. I had patients who were now adolescents and were facing like very healthy and natural development and questions related to menses and career, like nothing very pathologic, I have to say. I started to be curious about the adolescent brain and how they were changing. My own kids were also turning into adolescents. So that was like another motivator. And I felt that I needed to get trained in a more formal way. I had this friend who is Mexican. She was completing her fellowship at the hospital where I went to in Toronto. And I asked her, and she said, "Oh, there's a beautiful program in adolescent medicine here. Why don't you just look?" I just applied for it and read the requirements, contact the program director. It was very interesting because they said, "We want you to come to see if this is what you want."
Fast forward to when you got your acceptance letter. What are some of the things that you did to prepare yourself?
When you do a training that involves clinical work, you have to go through the process of being accepted by the institutions that allow physicians to practice medicine. Going to Canada, I started planning going there in 2018, and I ended up starting the fellowship in 2020. Planning to move, applying for certifications, doing the elective as an observership, and finally being accepted a year in advance.
Did you experience any hurdles?
I think that it was very helpful that the hospital provided with a timeline of what the process would look like. Of course, COVID shot right before the fellowship.
What are some of the things that were important to you as you were settling down and finding a place? What were some of the things that went through your mind?
So I knew that doing this fellowship was my dream and it was going to be a challenge for my children because they were now adolescents. So I really focused on helping them see that opportunity as a like an adventure. It was my priority to find a nice place for them to live, a nice school for them to attend, and in general, like to keep their attitude open, curious, willing to explore. It's very important to consider finances. When you go to a different country, you need to have financial security and be super clear on what you can spend and what you cannot. Like, be mindful about where to invest. Sometimes people would say, well, you were paying a high rent. And yes, I was paying more than most of people, but at the same time, my kids had a park right next to them. I was not worried about them. What were they doing after school? If I had to stay in the hospital for an extra hour, I knew they were safe. They were in a nice place. They were enjoying their time. And that reduced my sources of stress. I think it's just worth it to really think what your needs are and what your beloved ones' needs are and have them on the table.
Now that you mentioned finances, one of the things that keeps coming up as people are having conversations about fellowships is funding. I feel that people really struggle and it's such a huge barrier for a lot of people from all over the world. Could you, give us a sneak peek into what funding looked like?
First of all, I wanted to see if there were options from the program, and our program didn't have any funding for international fellows. And I had my savings, so I said I can put my savings and pay for my training. Then the hospital said, no, you cannot fund yourself for ethical reasons. We need somebody else to fund you. And because I was doing some projects on medical education, I had a couple projects that would be enough payment to fund the fellowship. Remember, I was traveling with my 3 children. So, according to the Canada law, you have to demonstrate a certain number of dollars per family member. So, the hospital provided with that information. And then these 2 projects I was working on, medical education, were paying enough money to document that I was going to be funded during the time of my fellowship. And these medical education projects were designed to be done online. So I knew that I was going to be able to continue to do that from Canada. So I got these letters. These projects were going to fund me. And then COVID happened. And in Mexico, the organization or the financial organization of healthcare wasn't that good. So The first year, they needed to reaccommodate their money or prioritize buying protecting materials like masks and gowns and gloves and all that. So they paused the movement of money for educational projects. So they never said we're not going to pay you. They only said we don't have the funding yet. And that was the case for 2 years. I was lucky to have had my savings to be able to continue. I let the program know that I was in this situation, and unfortunately, they were not able to support me. So I ended up funding my fellowship for the 2 years, and I would do it again. Like if I'm honest,
Mhm.
I would do it again.
How was the actual fellowship? What was the experience like for you?
It was a very rich experience. The COF fellows were the biggest gift, the friends. Because of COVID, the program had its own challenges because of the amount of patients that were coming, because of the admin stuff that was happening. People were working from home. So it was very challenging, particularly the first year where it wasn't easy to feel settled. Probably the second year, it was a lot easier because we were able to see more people. But now that I remember, Jerry, we had a tough year, the first one.
It was tough. Do you remember
It
the
was.
the winter night? We had
Oh,
just finished our really long day and we cried and we prayed and we just hugged. We're like,
yeah,
what
yeah.
are we doing?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's so interesting how
Yeah.
it's not that you forget about these things, but you choose
Mhm.
not to keep them in your memory, and you just heal and move on. I would say that really getting to build connections, like not academic, not professional connections, but personal connections with people who are going through kind of a same situation was very helpful. It's really the people around you who support you through fellowship. Because there's going to be challenges in the program, in your personal life.
I'd like to transition into how did your faith help you during your fellowship?
Wow, that's a big one. I've always thought that I'm part of a plan. And I honestly believe that I'm an instrument. I feel I've been spoiled by life. I know that I'm a woman who has been privileged. And I think that I have this commitment to help others. So whenever I was in a doubt, I always prayed and asked for guidance and light with the true belief that this is a plan for a better world and I want to be part of it. So, how can I put my best intention attitude to make this succeed?
With your faith, with your relationships and networks, there may have been some lows and in fellowship. Can you think about a couple that you're comfortable to share?
Yes, sure. I never anticipated experiencing racism. I think that I had read, heard, seen many proofs of Canada being a country open to internationals, willing to develop a multicultural community. And it wasn't necessarily what happened in real life in the hospital. The country is transitioning and is willing to evolve to a more inclusive society. But there's still some racism, and there's still some people who don't want to include, don't know how to, don't feel like, I don't know what their motivations are for not treating people, I wouldn't say all the same, but based on what their needs are. There's beautiful people in the staff, there's nasty people in the staff. And it was very surprising to me to start to experience feelings that I've never felt before, to doubt about myself, to see my self-esteem go down, to slowly realize that my confidence was being hurt. And I couldn't understand what was happening, and I looked for help. And the university provided counseling services that allowed me to understand what was happening, what the dynamics were with certain people in the program.
That does not sound easy. And talking about something so hurtful and so difficult is never easy. And I remember there would be many times you and I would sit down and we're like, some of these situations don't define who we are. I feel like those were words that we used to repeat to each other in different formats over and over again because you and I sat close to each other during our fellowship. And it's interesting that you talk about self-esteem and having gone through that. And to me, you're one of the most, self-actualized individuals and professionals that I have had the pleasure of meeting. And it's hurtful to hear that, you had the kind of experience that left you feeling the way you did in that moment.
Thank you, Jerry. I just think that I remember I reflected many, many times on how this non inclusive environment hurted my feelings. And I told you I'm 46. So I was always worried about younger people who might not be as confident or as mature or as well developed as I am. And I always thought that if that was difficult for me, I didn't quit. But I wonder if maybe younger people with a lower confidence or self esteem or lower privileges of being able to pay or stay in Canada would have continued to do the fellowship. I followed the path to report what was happening in the university, and I'm still in the process of documenting that just because I think that this shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen to people who are deciding to leave their countries, pursuing to learn more, willing to make this world a better place. And I think that institutions here in Canada are willing to change that. It's just that there's still many people who don't share those intentions.
Just to shift just a little bit, what were some of the things that you found to be fun and nourishing?
Well, I think that the beauty of the nature in Canada is really remarkable. So we spend a lot of time outdoor, listening to the birds. I did exercise every day, and I promoted social events with my co-fellows.
Do you have any regrets?
No, I don't think so. I'm not the kind of person who has regrets. I think it was what it was. I
Yeah.
enjoyed it. I learned. I'm a better person after that. And I'm deeply grateful for the full experience with the ups and the lows.
What would be, your parting shot or your parting words of wisdom?
I think I would say if you're willing to do a fellowship, you need to ask yourself what for? Like what are you going to do different once you complete your fellowship? If you are willing to get another degree, another diploma, if you want to make more money after it, and that is your motivation, have it clear in your mind. If you're willing to go and learn, to come back to your country and to help others, or to to move to that country and stay there and practice and help others, you have that clear in your mind, because if you don't have that clarity, you won't be able to navigate the challenges that get in front of you. Be surrounded by people who inspire you and who can share with you perspective so you can solve the problems you face in the fellowship.
Tamara, I want to take time and say a big, big thank you for you taking the time to share your experience with us, to share your joys and all the other beautiful things that have spanned your career and your points of impact.
I'm so glad you stayed tuned. Please get the word out and share it with at least 3 people. Make this episode like a chain letter. Share it, share it, share it. Come back for the next leg of our safari, where we'll be talking about
how was experiencing the learning in South Africa for allergy.
In fact, it was an amazing hospital that I was working in, and also under the umbrella of an amazing university. So this hospital has all sorts of specialists that you can imagine. A lot of donor money that comes in there as well. So it's like really well equipped and just a very pleasant place to work. Mm-hmm. And then now boiling down to the department where I was working, it was a very well organized, well orchestrated department that was getting a lot of sort of like what would I say, like help from the people who are running the fellowship program. So they like would work very synchronously.
It takes a village to make this podcast. Strategic and creative direction was done by Josephine Karianjahi and Melissa Mbogwa. The producer of the show is Melissa Mbogwa. Tevin Sudi is the sound engineer, with thanks to AQ Studios. The graphic design was done by Benjamin Boyer, and the original music was done by husband extraordinaire Mwakavi Maweo. This is an Africa Podfest production.